Happy Father's Day. I wish I could say if you forgot it's important, but it's really not. So Father's Day is wedged right between Arbor Day and Groundhog Day. So that's kind of the world rankings of the holidays, but we're glad that you're here. I know for some, as Jonathan asked me to share this morning, the idea of a Father's Day message or sermon or panel can be a little bit painful. And we always recognize that every time we do we have a special holiday, because we recognize that there are people who are here this morning that for you, this Father's Day is harboring all kinds of painful memory, grief, things that are troubling you today. Some that your father passed away this year, others that you had a husband or a father who walked away, and there's all kinds of other things that for Father's Day for you, you're like, it's really not a joyful occasion. So just know that as myself and these guys, as we've been preparing and praying, we just want you to know we've had you on our hearts. We've been thinking about you and been praying for you. We know that this could be a difficult day for you. Just know that our hearts are with you. But in my opinion, I thought that the role of a father is such an important role in our society and in our culture. And I think for many families, I hate to say it, it's almost the missing element. This idea of having a godly father, a godly role model, a godly leader in your home. And so we want to take just a few moments and just discuss a little bit about what does a godly father look like? What are some characteristics of a godly father? And as I thought about this time together, I thought, well, maybe we just need to hear from several fathers. And so I asked several godly fathers to join me on stage. Unfortunately, none of them could make it. So these guys were able to carve out some time. And so we're going to use them today, this morning. And so guys, why don't you introduce yourselves and just kind of tell us a bit about your families.
Well, yes, my name is Ben Ilegbodu. My wife and I have been married for 13 years, almost 14 years, Rashida and I. We have 3 kids. Our oldest, Simone, she's 10 years old. Our middle daughter, Avery, she's 7. And then our youngest son, Asher, he just turned 5. And we've been here at Second for just over a year.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben.
Welcome.
My name is Glenn Russell. I am married to Kelly for the last 16 years almost. We have 2 children. I have Glenn Curtis Russell V, about to leave for beach retreat here in just a little bit. He's 13 years old and just finished 7th grade. And then Jonas is 10, and he just finished 5th grade.
And I'm Jeff Williams, married to Caitlin Williams for 10 and a half years now. And we have a recently turned 9-year-old, Ella Kate, and today my son turned 7, James Victor.
That's awesome. And James is going to get baptized during
That's right.
11 o'clock service.
That's right. Best day
It's going to be a great day for the Williams today. As we thought through this, another thing that we talked about was that a lot of things that we're going to discuss really are not just limited just to the role of father. A lot of these are parenting principles. And so, moms, don't be elbowing the dad all morning long. Hey, did you get that? Did you get that? Because some of this stuff is going to be for you also. If you're a coach, if you're a teacher, there's all kinds of areas where the things that we're going to discuss, if you have an area of authority or leadership over children, a lot of this is going to apply to you. The first principle I want us to look at is the idea that a godly father is an equipper. A godly father is an equipper. To equip means to furnish for service or action by appropriate provisioning. Another definition that I saw that we can understand is simply to make ready. To make ready. That part of our role as a father is to help our children to prepare for whatever that next phase is, whatever that next season is. And that's why parenting looks so different in so many different seasons of life. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, it says, "Start children off the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not turn from it." Ephesians 6:4, "Fathers, do not aspirate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." And listen to what this verse says in Proverbs 13:14. "The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life turning a person from the snares of death. This idea that we teach our children so that they can grow and become everything that God wants them to be. It's not the church's job, it's not the school's job, it's the family's job, it's the parents' job, but the father takes a primary role in making sure that that happens. And it says there in that verse that if we don't teach our children, if we don't lead them well in this area, that we're actually being a part of them down the road experiencing all kinds of grief and even possibly death. That's how seriously the Lord takes that. Let me ask you guys this. What is something that you learned from your dad that you are trying to teach your kids? Glenn, let's start with you.
Yeah, one of the things that my dad was really big on was letting me learn from my own mistakes, and I've made plenty of them. And it's something I really want to pass to my kids. I think when you talk about equipping, making ready, I know that my tendency, the thing I want to do as a parent is I want to set really strict guardrails around my kids' lives. I want to say, like, you do not do this, you do this. But if I make all the decisions for my kids, then they will not be equipped to make those decisions when I'm not around. And so one of the things I learned from my dad is I need to give them a little bit of room to make some mistakes and to experience some successes, and then I can celebrate that and teach in those moments.
That's good. Jeff, what about you?
Love that. So one thing I learned from my father just from an early age is how much he enjoys our company as his kids. I think I got a really good picture of a Heavenly Father who enjoys spending time with you, dwelling with you, being with you. So I'm hoping to pass that on to my kids as well. Their dad, both of their fathers, really enjoy them.
Okay, when it comes to teaching your kids, what are some specific areas, skills that you are trying to intentionally instill into your children? Ben?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things, right? So I'm trying to teach them character, right? So teach them how to have teamwork, how to persevere during difficult times, how to work hard, have a good work ethic, and things like that, right? So that comes from sports, that comes from school most of the time, right? But what's even more important is that I want to teach them to have faith, right? To have their own faith. So I want them to know God, have a relationship with God, and the way that we build that up is by coming to church, by praying with them, having family devotional time, things like that. But even more than that, we want to build godliness into them, right? So it's not just reading the Bible, it's how can you study the Bible and understand it yourself. That's what we're trying to teach them, like how to hear from God, how to discern God's voice, how to share Jesus with other people. It's like all these things that we have learned recently, what happens if we could teach them that 20 years earlier than, what we learned, right? Awesome. What kind of impact could that have in their lives? Right. And that's something that we're still trying to figure out and things. Like, for instance, recently, our daughter, we read the Bible, and she'll hear, oh, God spoke to Moses, or the angel came to Mary and told her something. So then when we ask her questions like, what is God telling you about this? She'll say, God doesn't speak to me. I don't hear from God, right? Which, makes sense as a 7-year-old. But we used to just say, oh, it's the Bible times, they spoke to them. But then she kept asking and asking and asking and asking. We realized, okay, we have to actually answer this question. So we had to take time intentionally to start telling her how we discern his voice. We pray based on this situation, we try to understand, and then after what's happened, how do we feel? God spoke to us. So it's like this intentionality, what could be 2 minutes ends up being a 30-minute conversation. It's like, most of the time I don't want to do that. I'd rather watch TV, but that kind of time is important.
Are your kids like my kids? My kids were very spiritual right before bed.
Yeah.
Like when it was time to go to sleep, suddenly they were asking all these deep questions of faith.
Exactly.
And, Mommy, how do I know God loves me before I go to sleep? Kids can tend to do that. Glenn, what about you?
Well, I love what you just said, Ben. I think that what it sounds like to me is that you're really pushing towards ownership. Yeah. You want your kids to own it, and you want them to start to take steps towards that at a young age. And I think that when I think of the principles that I really want my kids to take. We live in a world which is very selfish, very self-centered. We have our sinful nature tells us to make things all about ourselves, and so you start to hear things like, "My brother did this to me," or "Everything is unfair." Or I say this all the time when my kids are acting a little wild. "You're driving me crazy," and we just always make things about ourselves, but it's not about like ownership. It's all about blaming somebody else and thinking about how you're a victim. And so one of the principles I really am trying to teach my kids is how do we get away from you're always a victim and start to think about reflecting about what can I do? How can I take a step forward and make sure that I am thinking about myself but not being selfish?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. I think one of the keys is, I think you mentioned it, is intentionality. You know, many of us have routines before our kids go to bed, and we read the Bible and we pray and we ask them how their day was and those kind of things. And certainly that's important. But what I've found is that there are teaching moments all the time. Yeah. There's always things that happen that are chances for us to look at our kids and explain some kind of biblical principle or some kind of teaching about Christ. When our kids were little, anytime we heard a siren, if we were driving and there was a siren, there was a show called Rescue 911, and my girls would go, "Uh-oh, Rescue 911." I'm like, "Well, what should we do?" And they said, "We should pray," and we would pray in the car. They would pray for whoever was hurt, whoever was in trouble, because we wanted them to know that prayer is important, that we wanted them to pray when things weren't going well. I remember one time with Kelsey, we were fairly poor, and she was at that age where she needed a car, and we were like, "I don't know how we're going to get this money for a car. We got to figure something out." And I made a mistake on our taxes where I deducted twice as much as I was supposed to. And so I get this gargantuan check back from the IRS. I'm like, "What happened? Where did all this money come from?" And our accountant's like, "Well, you actually messed up. You took out twice as much taxes that you should have." And I was like, "Well, there's a car. You know, there's Kelsey's car." But I didn't just go out and get a car and then say, "Here are the keys." We went and got the car. We pulled up in front of the house, and I said, "Before you get out of the car, we need to talk about this for just a second." I said, we didn't have the money to buy you a car this nice. We did not have that kind of money. I said, "You were going to get a $500 dumpy piece of junk. You were not going to get a nice car." I said, this is a really nice car. This is a nice car for your age." I said, "I messed up." I said, "But it worked out where God said, here's the money." I said, "Also, the people that sold us the car, they were asking X amount. They knew we were looking for a car. They said, 'Well, Jeff, for you and for Kelsey, we'll give it to you for this amount.' And that amount happened to match the amount that we had gotten back on our IRS check." And so I told Kelsey, I looked at her and I said, "So you need to understand that God is the one who provided this car for you. God is the one who gave us the resources for this car." So if I could encourage you, be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for those kind of moments where you can just kind of hit pause on life and look at your son or your daughter, whether they're 5, whether they're 15, 25, or they're 35 like my kids, that there are opportunities for us to continually teach our children. So a godly father is an equiper. Number 2, a godly father is an enforcer. I know for some guys, like, okay, now we're talking. Here we go. This is right down this is my sweet spot right here. And unfortunately, though, it's something that does have to be done. Has to do. Father has to discipline. He has the responsibility for disciplining his kids. Proverbs 19:18. "Discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death." Again, there's this idea if we don't discipline, we're leading to their death. Proverbs 29:15, "A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother." Verse 17, "Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire." And I got to be honest, my kids grew up in the 80s, and so my kids grew up not just with Christian parents, but with James Dobson Christian parents. It was, we don't tolerate any kind of disrespect. There's no talking back. You can spill your milk, you can make mistakes, and things happen. But when it came to disrespect, that was just something that was just not tolerated at all in our family. And so I think that there's a place for, we want to be, to love our kids. We want our kids to know they can come to us at any time with anything, but our kids also need to understand that we are called as fathers, as parents, to also discipline our kids. Ben, what are some principles that you can share about disciplining your kids?
Yeah, so one thing that's important for me is to be consistent with the rules, right? So today I can't say, oh, yes, you can have ice cream after dinner, and then tomorrow say, no, you can't, right? Because kids want to obey the rules. They just need to know what they are. Our kids do. And I also have to be consistent with Rashida, right? So she can't say, no, you can't have some, and then I say, yes, you can, and then all of a sudden she's the bad guy, woman.
Okay, everybody listen to that. You got to have a united front.
Yes, exactly.
No matter how much you might disagree, you're a united front when it comes to your children.
Yeah. And then I need to have perseverance, because my son especially, he's 5 years old. He will push and push and push, and he'll try to take it to a 15 in order to get what he wants, right? But I can remember to persevere in that way. And then the biggest one for me is not making idle threats, right? So we can't be at dinner and he act up, and then I say, well, if you keep acting up, you're not going to get dessert at the end, just your sisters. If I did that, when that time came, he would just go crazy, and then we wouldn't have any peace, and then I would just give in. So, I can't make that threat unless I'm willing to back up that threat, right?
Yeah.
So that's just something that I've learned, and then he realizes when I do make threats that I will live through them, and then, it helps with the discipline.
Yeah, that's a good word. Whatever your form of discipline is, you better be ready to back it up.
Yep.
You got to be ready to back it up. They got to know that your word is solid, that when you say something, that you're going to do it. I remember one time we were at Disney World, and this mom, bless her heart, she was having so much problem with her kids. And I remember her looking at her kids and going, if you don't stop, we're leaving Disney World right now. And that kid was like, yeah, right. I know how much this costs. We ain't leaving Disney World. I can act however I want to. And I told Lori, I'm like, yeah, that kid is in control right now, because mom just made a threat that she has no intention whatsoever of fulfilling. Guys, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just one thing that changed my perspective on discipline is just how much discipline is an act of love for your kids. When we're in that mindset, I think it takes the selfishness away. And, maybe not in the moment, but over time, our kids will probably understand, my dad loved me enough to discipline me, and he wanted to push me towards the Lord through discipline.
That's awesome. I hate the phrase tough love. I hate that phrase, because it's not tough love. It's just love. Because I love my child, I'm going to discipline my child because he or she needs that. I think one specific area, we talk about the idea of being an enforcer, is this concept of, as dads, as parents, we got to protect the perimeter. We got to make sure that the outside, we can do a great job, and many a parent has done a great job raising their kids, but when it came time, they were sabotaged from the outside. And I think the key ingredient of that is the friends that they choose. I think that is a key thing that you as parents need to make sure that you hang on to. Proverbs 13:20, it says, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. So, what are some of the things that you can do to protect your children from having friends who are negative influences? Well, I can speak for us. One of the things that we did when our kids were younger was we made sure that our house was the house that all the other kids wanted to come to. So we took a room and we changed it into, I'm going to date myself here, we had an Xbox, and we bought an Xbox, and we put movie-themed decorations up and posters of movies and a TV in there, and our kids knew that we wanted their friends to come to our house. So when little Susie shows up and she's wearing a Longhorn shirt, I can say, hey, Kels, couldn't help but notice, Colby Thomas, little Susie's wearing a Longhorn shirt, and I don't know if this is really the kind of child we really want you hanging out with. So it kind of helps you to know, who your kids are hanging out with. Our kids' friends knew if they came to our house, we were going to buy pizza. We wanted their friends at our house, and it was wonderful. It was a great chance to to meet them, but also to try to influence those kids, to show them what a Christian home looks like, show them what Christian parenting looks like. Guys, any thoughts on that, trying to protect your children from having friends who are negative influences?
I think that, I totally agree with that. And I think that what we're doing when we do that is a lot of our decisions we make either increase or decrease our odds of that working out, right? So you decrease your odds when you start skipping Sundays, for example. You increase your odds when you encourage relationships in the church and in the youth group and stuff along those lines. We 5 years ago, we'd been going to a church in Sugar Land, and we loved our church. We had a lot of great relationships there. We had a long history there, and our kids were getting older, and we knew that we wanted their core relationships and friendships to be with kids that they had something deeper than just we like the same activities. We wanted it to be spiritually founded. And so we switched churches. We started coming to South 5 years ago because we live a quarter of a mile that way. To be highly engaged with the community that is here was easy with proximity. It increased our odds a little bit.
That's good. That's good. So a godly father is an enforcer. A godly father is also an encourager. An encourager. This is kind of the other side of that coin. Yes, there are times we have to discipline, we have to be tough. We have to make sure that they're walking the line. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that when they're doing well, when they're successful, when they're honoring God, that we encourage them. Proverbs 18:21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruits." Proverbs 12:18, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Colossians 3:21, "Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged." How was the way that you guys were raised affected how you try to encourage your kids? Is there any kind of correlation between how you were raised and how you now encourage your kids? Jeff?
Absolutely. So one thing I just copied from my own parents was praying encouragement into my kids. So starting from an early age, putting hands on them, letting them hear me pray out loud. Lord Jesus, please draw Ella Kate to yourself. I look forward to the day she places her faith in you. I want her to hear that coming from her dad.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Ben, what about you?
So what I've come to realize is that there's like 3 types of encouragement I can give my kids. The easiest one is when they do something great. So yesterday, my daughter swim team, she got first place. So yes, good job, encouragement. The other one is like something difficult's happening and I want her to persevere. So yes, I know practice was hard, you got hurt, keep going, you can do it. The one that's hardest for me is to encourage them when they're doing something good. Like it's easy for me to, when they're doing something bad, to talk to them about it, but when they did something good, I want to encourage them to keep doing that good thing. So her siblings were cheering her on when she was swimming, and I was just like, that's great. Continue to cheer on your sister. So it's hard to remember to actually do that, to encourage them to keep doing good things.
Glenn, what about you?
When I think about this idea of encouragement, I think that sometimes there's a difference between the things we say and the way we actually make our kids feel about themselves. I work with teachers a lot of times, and one of the things that I'll ask them is I'll say, think about your favorite teacher that you had growing up. Do you remember specific things that they taught you? And about half of people can say, yeah, they taught me this, they taught me that. Then I ask a follow-up question is, do you remember how they made you feel? And everybody can remember that. With their favorite teacher, they know how that person made them feel about themselves. They felt honored, they felt respected, they felt trusted, they felt heard. As parents, we have that same thing. We're gonna tell our kids a lot of stuff. We're gonna give them a lot of advice. We're gonna give them a lot of direction and instruction. But what can be much more meaningful sometimes is how do we make our kids feel about themselves? And that encouragement is a key piece there.
And that kind of speaks to more of a legacy parenting. When your kids are older and they look back and they say, my dad made me feel like this, or my parents made me feel like this. That's all great, guys. Last one. A godly father is an example. A godly father is an example. Proverbs 20, verse 7, the righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them. 1 Corinthians 11:1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. I think for all of us who are Christ followers, one of the things that we need to always keep reminding ourselves is that there's always people that are watching us. They're always watching us. And for our kids especially, they're going to grow up watching us. If you don't believe kids watch what you do, just watch this video. Your kids are watching, I promise you. Even when you're tumbled over backwards and you don't realize it, they are watching. They are watching you. They're watching how we love our wives. You know, our kids are going to learn how a man is supposed to treat his wife, how a godly man treats his wife by watching you. Work ethic, how we handle our money. Most importantly, what it means to be a follower of Christ. What it truly means to follow Jesus. What is something that your kids love because you love it? Let's start with Jeff.
My kids love joking around and goofing off, which is great most of the time, but if it ever goes too far, Caitlin just looks at me, and it's all for me, so it's my fault they do that.
I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my kids have visited several times to go see family, but they have no real California connections themselves. But if you would have been in our living room when the 49ers just lost the Super Bowl a couple of months ago, the devastation and tragedy that hit our household, my children were suffering that day. And unfortunately, they got that fandom, I think, from me.
How about you, Ben?
Basketball, for sure. So I grew up playing basketball. My son loves basketball. He plays in next level with 4th and 5th graders, even though he's 5 years old. I got him one of those little tight basketball hoops for his first birthday. Couldn't walk, couldn't do anything with it, but I just gave it to him, gave him the ball to play with just so I could, speak life into him to play baskall.
You're like, run those sprints, kids.
Yes, exactly.
Dad, I can't walk. Sorry, it's a hard world out there. If you're going to make it in the NBA. One of the things that I meant to say earlier and didn't, please do not interpret us in any way trying to appear or trying to allude to the fact that we're perfect and we got it all together. Okay, so please don't think of that. In fact, as I thought about, what are some examples where you were a good role model? And I thought, you know what? No, what somebody might need to hear today is that, there are times when we blow it. There are times when we mess up. What's some times when, an example maybe where you weren't a good role model for your kids? Ben?
Oh, you're calling on me, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say a good situation is, again, with my daughter, our middle daughter, she went and did something that mom told her to do or she'd have told her to do. I didn't realize it. I got mad at her about it. She was trying to explain but, and I was like, no buts. Like, no, you can't do this. She runs away crying, and then it's not until I talked to Rashida that I realized there was that miscommunication. That's happened a lot of times, actually. And sometimes I am selfish, to be honest, and say, well, if she would listen all the time, I wouldn't get confused, and it's her fault. I'm not going to apologize. And honestly, that's usually what happens. But sometimes I do, and I go and apologize to her and say, oh, I didn't realize you talked to mommy about this. Like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get upset with you, that sort of thing. So, yeah, and it kind of builds us closer together when I do apologize. So I blew it, but then it gives an opportunity to have restoration.
Yeah. Glenn, Jeff, anybody?
Yeah, I'd say, unfortunately, not that many Sundays ago, we were both late to church and not having good attitudes in the car. So those are like two big ones for Dad. And I went.
You mean that happens to you too?
Unfortunately. This morning was very good, thankfully. But anyways, I went way too far. I was very harsh in tone. I really set my kids up to not have a good Sunday morning learning about the Lord. So thankfully, after a good sermon and some worship time at lunch, Freebirds afterwards, Dad got to apologize. So I think even when we goof, we have that opportunity to show some humility, show them what it looks like to apologize and own when we mess up. So
I think that's really it. Is it like asking for forgiveness and confessing that we screwed up is a hard thing to do, and it is not a popular thing to do culturally. And if we are called to be different, that's one of the best ways we can set that example for our kids.
Well, what better example to set, though, when we as dads go to our 7-year-old and say, hey, I just want you to know I need to ask you to forgive me. I don't know if there's a more powerful demonstration of manliness and masculinity than to say, you know what, I was wrong. I've had to do that before with my children, where I've said, Daddy yelled and Daddy spanked you out of anger, and I should not have done that. I was wrong in that, and you have to apologize to your kids. So just know that there's always times when we all mess up and we make mistakes, but grace abounds, luckily. One last thing, listen to your wives. My wife has helped me so many times I've said something that I thought was a really funny joke to one of my girls. I thought it was hilarious personally, and she would come back and say, yeah, you're going to pay for that one. And I realized that, that didn't fly with them like I thought it was going to. And so for her to say that and then she says it lovingly most of the time, half of the time. But to go back and say, hey, I said something. I really was joking, but it hurt your feelings, and I apologize for that. So men, lean into your wives and trust their judgment on these kind of things. Do me a favor. Let's thank these guys for sharing with us this morning. In the book, 7 Habits of Effective People, Stephen Covey talks about these 7 principles. And principle number 2 is begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. Look down the road and say, okay, what do I want this project to look like? What does success look like? What do I want this building to look like? This house, whatever it might be. As parents, you and I have got to begin with the end in mind. We're building something for the future. You're building something that's going to last down the road. So when you're parenting and you're a dad and sometimes it just seems so overwhelming, just know that you're building something for down the road because time goes by so fast. It is amazing. And you have a brief 18 to 22-year-old window before your kid goes off to college or your kid joins the workforce. And I can promise you're going to wish that you had begun all this with the end in mind, because when that moment comes, you're going to hope and pray that you've done everything you can. I remember our first daughter going to college, and she went to a little Christian school called Mary Hardin Baylor in Belton, Texas, and we went up on Friday, and they had all the activities, and we went to Target and got all the stuff for her room, and we decorated her room, and went out to dinner, and then we fixed up the room the next day. And it was about Saturday at about 2 o'clock, I think it was, when suddenly it was like time stopped. And everything was done. And I remember us being in that room. I remember saying, well, I guess it's time to go. I guess it's time to go. And that moment hit me like a ton of bricks because I thought, God, please, I've done everything I can to prepare them for this moment. But we're walking out and there are boys with no shirts on in the quad. And I'm like, what kind of pagan school is this? And I'm like, I hope they're ready. I hope they're ready. And men, I'm just going to say this as bluntly as I can. There is nothing that you will do in this world that will outweigh the feeling of success and pride you'll have raising kids who grow up to love Jesus. I'm just telling you. And you might sit there and you're like, well, I'm on the verge of solving cancer. I'm like, yeah, it might be a close second. But I got a 33 and 35-year-old. I'm 62 years old. There is nothing that I am more proud of than the fact that Lori and I, by the grace of God, at this moment in time, have 2 girls who are passionately in love with Jesus. There's nothing more important. One last verse and we'll be done. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. It says, "These commandments I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up." It talks there about impressing these laws, impressing God's laws on the hearts of your children. But do you know what it says first? They're supposed to be on your heart first. Pastor Jonathan said this a while back, and it stuck with me, that you can't teach what you don't have. You can't be an example of something that you're not living out. So as we now get ready to enter into this time of invitation and response, what is it that God's calling you to do? You might be here and you're like, I've never truly given my life to Christ. I couldn't be a godly father because I don't know God. There's nothing we would love more than to talk with you about what it means to be in relationship with Jesus Christ. You may be here today and you say, you know what, I'm a Christian father, but I've not been acting it. You can pray at your seat. You can certainly do that. You can pray as a couple if you want to. But I just want to challenge you. If you're here today and you're like, you know what, I just need to pray, I want to invite you to come down front. And this isn't hey, if you love your kids, come down front and pray. This is, hey, I'm burdened for my children. I want to pray for them. I want to physically take this step before God. If you're here today and you just need somebody to pray with you, these three guys and myself, we're going to be right down front. But here's what's going to happen. We're going to sing, and during that song, we're going to stand. And if you feel God leading you to do something, whatever it might be, what is it that God's calling you to today? I want to encourage you to respond.